Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa.
And Kevin.
And on today's topic, we are discussing how to homestead inexpensively. Welcome to the 2 Acre Homestead. Come along with us on our journey from a small suburban homestead lifestyle to our new lifestyle, homesteading in the rural countryside of southern Arizona. We'll share with you our tips, tricks, successes, and failures from both our past suburban lifestyle to our new rural lifestyle, all on the 2 Acre Homestead. On last week's episode, we talked about if homesteading can actually save you money. This week, we want to focus on homesteading in such a way that it's inexpensive. But before we get into that, what have you been up to, Kevin?
Well, no projects right now, but I just went to the feed store because we were running low on insulation.
Insulation?
Right. Well, I mean, to kind of keep in this theme with, keeping things inexpensive, it's been hard to get some of the feed for especially the chickens. We're getting closer to sending the meat birds to freezer camp, probably, 2.5 weeks, and trying to go a little bit more frequently because we're running low. So, yeah, insulation, trying to insulate us from spending more.
Yep, that's how we do things here.
And even dog food, it was kind of crazy because, we have dogs on our homestead, and there are 2 stores that are neck and neck with the pricing. I'm not kidding. This store, the cost per bag was 50% more. So I went to the other store, I checked, and their price was still what I expected it to be. So I loaded up and got 4 bags, which I don't normally do.
Yeah, and I think you said you checked the expiration date on the dog food, and
I think September of 2023. So yeah, I felt that was okay to make that purchase.
Just as a side note, if you buy lots of dog food, just know it can go rancid past the expiration date.
Yep. So that's basically where I'm at. What's new in your neck of the woods?
Well, it's been all hands on deck for the gardens. I am happy to say I've got all of my chickpeas planted, all of the Swiss chard, strawberries. Oh, goodness. Let's see. Corn is going in this week. Flowers have gone in. I've just about killed myself in the kitchen garden. Got that all situated, put in infrastructure, some fencing in there, and it has just been all hands on deck. Every part of our gardens. My hands are rough, my bones ache, but yeah, that's really where I've been. I had one disaster, and that's because we've had a freak freeze. This late in the season, we had temperatures plummet overnight past 32 degrees. I think here in our little microclimate, it feels like it got down to maybe 28. So it killed off all the peppers. I had a whole row of peppers. I think, I don't know, something like 10 to 15 plants. They all died. All of them dead. And so I've given up on peppers for this year. So this year I'm going to be sourcing most of my peppers from a local U-Pick farm. But that's really the only setback that we've had.
Yeah, and I know it's been a learning experience moving to a different growing zone here. We're going to do some PVC pipe to better insulate to allow us to keep birds and other critters out. So some things we're learning. There's a lot we've been trying to do since we've moved on the property, but we'll probably talk more about that when we close out this season about lessons learned.
Yeah, because that's really the thing. I mean, we've been gardening for over a decade at this point, and the thing is that every year and every climate is different. And on this particular property, even though we're in growing zone 8A, we have these microclimates. I mean, one end of our property is, I would say it's more suited for growing zone 7A to 6B. No joke. I mean, it's really cold on that side, and that's where the main garden is. Whereas the potager garden, which is closer to the house, is right on track with a growing zone of 8A, 8B. But so that's really what we're dealing with, is a lot of microclimates here on our homestead. But that's really what I've been busy with.
Sounds good. If we then turn our attention to what we were going to talk about for this episode, we're talking about how to homestead inexpensively. So there's kind of three main topics that we wanted to address when it comes to that. The first is going to be start where you are. The second one, garden and preserve simply. And then we'll talk about how to plan smart with tools and supplies. So let's talk about that first item, start where you are.
Yeah, I really think that that's important for people to understand. You really need to start where you are physically. When you have decided that this is a lifestyle that you want, the most inexpensive thing you can do is start where you are. And there's a lot of benefits to it. And it basically comes down to sharpening and honing your skills. Homesteading is a skill set. It takes time to develop it. It's not something that you're just going to watch a couple of videos, read a few books, and then be comfortable to go outside and start planting all of your food and growing all of your animal food, planting, preserving. These things take time. They take time to develop and time to hone. So when you're starting where you are already currently located, the advantage that you have is the area, where to get supplies, and like what we were just talking about is your climate. Because there's your overall climate, then you have what's called microclimates. And so when you are starting your homesteading journey exactly where you are, you're not dealing with learning these hard lessons and trying to make more adjustments than you may have to. And you're also accustomed to the expense of living where you are. Because let's just say you decide you want to homestead and you say, I'm going to pull up stakes and we're going to go move to the hills of Colorado and we're going to live on 40 acres. Well, there's going to be a lot of expense involved in that proposition. Whereas if you just stayed where you were and honed your skills, then you'll be able to not only move in the future to that property, but now you've got the skill set to back yourself up. And for those of you with a backyard, there are practical things that you can do in your situation. If you've got a lawn in your backyard, dig some of that lawn up, plant a garden. I highly recommend people to try to start your gardening not with raised beds. If you're looking to do it inexpensively, just avoid raised bed gardening. Plant in ground. And the way that you do that is planting with berms, where the ground is kind of raised up. You've used some soil amendments and you've dug, some areas up and you've raised that soil. You've amended that soil. Plant directly in the ground. Because the cost of wood is very expensive and you can avoid all of that cost by just simply planting in ground. If you've got some trees that have been felled, chop up some of the trunks of those trees and do a hugelkultur. Dig the trunks of those trees into the ground, then pour the soil back over it and amend the soil. And now you've got hugelkultur going on. And that is an excellent way to help your soil to make it nice and easy to plant in. If you are going to spend money when it comes to gardening, this is where I would say it's the most effective thing for you to spend your money on. Fencing. Fencing is important and people don't tend to think about that too much, but fencing is important when you're talking about a garden. Because you may want to keep your kids out, or, dogs or pets. You may want to keep them out of your garden. You may want to keep deer or any other, thing, person, animal out of your garden. So that way your plants can grow. The other effective way of spending your money when it comes to a garden is soil amendment. I would spend money on soil amendment. Now, when I say spending money on soil amendment, I'm talking about getting maybe a bag or two of raised bed soil amendments, even though you're not doing a raised bed, but those bags of raised bed soil amendments are designed for good drainage. The other thing that I would spend my money on is some sort of covering for your plants. So making sure not for your plants, but like a mulch, making sure your ground is mulched because you want to retain the moisture. And I would use for my mulch, I would use wood chips because you can either get them for free or you can bring them in with bags. But eventually what's going to happen is that's going to break down into your soil and that's going to provide a good amendment for your soil. So that is where I would really focus my money. If I'm going to spend money on a garden, and I've got the backyard to do it, that's what I would do.
Okay, sounds good. So then our second area that we wanted to touch on is garden and preserve simply.
Well, we've already talked about gardening, but preserve simply. And I think we were talking about this, and that is, being able to simply preserve the harvest. And I'm especially directing this to people who have a backyard, who are in the suburbs, and you're looking to start homesteading. Starting off small, but being able to preserve your harvest in a more cost-effective way. For example, dehydrating. Dehydrating for a small backyard gardener, dehydrating is your best friend. Because you can simply do that. Like, let's say, for example, with your herbs, you can hang your herbs up to dry. Same thing with a lot of your other plants that maybe you want to preserve, you can dehydrate them. And you can do that simply. You don't have to run out to the grocery store or to the store and buy a dehydrator. You can simply let them air dry, especially if you're in a more arid climate or a drier climate. It's very, very easy to do. The other thing, as far as preserving is concerned, is freezing food. You already have a freezer, likely. So being able to freeze your food, freeze some of the things that you've harvested, is brilliant. If you want to get more technical, and you want a deeper skill set, I highly recommend learning how to ferment. Now, here's a trick with fermenting. There are a lot of things that you can buy for fermenting. You can buy, specialized crocks. You can buy the weights that go in the crocks. You can do all of that stuff. You can buy the little burpee, the burpers. You can buy the, I can't think of all of the things that you can buy, but you can buy all of those things if you have the budget for it. But if you're trying to start your homesteading journey on a tight budget or with practically nothing, then I would say get yourself a few mason jars and ferment some of your food. Fermenting simply with salt or vinegar, but preferably salt, and preferably sea salt or kosher salt or pickling salt, is your best friend. You're taking your skill set to a higher level. You don't need all of those fancy things to ferment. You simply need a mason jar, a lid. Take, for example, your tomatoes. We love fermented tomatoes on our homestead. We take our tomatoes, we wash them off, we put them in a half-gallon or sometimes 1-gallon glass jar, stuff that jar with the tomatoes, put a teaspoon of, 1 tablespoon of salt, depending on the size of your jar, and pour in water that, not the city tap water, but you want like bottled water or even distilled water, any sort of water that does not have chlorine in it. Top that off, sit that on your counter, walk away. Every day you're going to burp that, jar, and all that means is you open up the lid and you let some of the air out, close it up, and you go on with life. And you do that every day for 5 days. And after that, you have fermented tomatoes. And you can put that in your refrigerator, and that can last a very, very long time. But that's just one way of preserving food that's inexpensive. But, learning those type of skills, they don't require a lot of money. They don't require the fancy gadgets. But the nice thing is once you get to a point financially where you can afford some of those fancy gadgets, you have a deeper appreciation for those gadgets and how to use them. And now you have a skill set, and you know how to use those things and to do those things on the harder level than somebody who just rushed out to the store and had all of these fancy gadgets, and heaven forbid those things break. They wouldn't know what to do, but you do, because you did it a little bit inexpensive. So there's some benefits on doing it, starting out homesteading inexpensively.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to build a homestead from the ground up? Or maybe you're looking to build an off-grid dream home, a vacation home, or maybe just a piece of land to call your own. Visit yourcheapland.com to buy rural land in the wide open spaces of southwestern United States. When you visit yourcheapland.com, they're here to help you, and with their help, you can do this. You can take your dream of owning land and make it a reality. Most down payments are only $294, including the document fee. Remember, everyone qualifies for financing at yourcheapland.com. Head on over to yourcheapland.com and start making those dreams come true. And now, back to our podcast.
Okay, sounds good. So then our third area that we were going to touch on is how to plan smart with tools and supplies. So the first thing is, I would say, buy quality tools, not necessarily the cheapest. So speaking of gardens, for example, when we moved to our property here, rural property, we needed some splitters for water. To run a couple of hoses, let's say off of one spigot, a couple off of another. Learning experience. I bought a splitter basically made of plastic, although it had metal parts to it. And after maybe 2 months, it's dead. Spraying water everywhere. Very frustrating. So, learned from that and bought actually a brass one that actually cost less, which was interesting. Bought it online, but it did cost less. But look at things in general, how they're constructed. So something basic like a splitter, look for things like that. Are there gaps? Is it made of metal? Is it something that can withstand the cold and the hot temperature differences where you're at? I know we have extremes here in southern Arizona. So those are some things to think about. And in general, when you're talking about tools, then other gardening tools that you're going to use maybe handheld sprayers that are 30 inches long, something like that. Again, look at those. How are they constructed? Another learning experience. We bought some sprayers that just didn't last more than a few months. And then I'm going out there and buying them again. So take the time, look at them, get a few quality ones, maybe even get an extra one. So if something happens, you've got something on hand. Then when it comes to things like rakes, hose, those types of tools, look at the construction of the handle and then also where the base part of the tool is attached to that handle. I can speak from experience in Arizona. Fiberglass handles last a lot longer than wooden ones. The wooden ones take some maintenance. You can, do some restoration if the coating starts wearing off. You can sand them down. You can then oil them and let them dry, and so on. But fiberglass handles tend to last a lot longer.
And that's because of the heat.
Right, exactly. The heat will wear down those sealants that they put on the wood, and then you get splinters and so on. And if you're not wearing gloves, which sometimes happens when you're out there, you get splinters, and that gets annoying. And then look at, like I mentioned, look at where the bottom of that tool, whether it's a shovel, a rake, something like that, look at where it attaches to the handle. You'll typically see a couple of rivets holding that together if it's done well, and sometimes those can slip off, and then you basically, the end of the rake, the shovel can fall off, and then you're going out buying a new tool. So the more you look at some of these things ahead of time, how they're constructed can really help you, because the longer they're going to last, then that's going to be less money that you're spending on those things that you use all the time. So another thing to think about is lumber. We've done a few projects recently where we've had to purchase lumber, 2x4s, siding, roofing materials, things like that. Lumber prices have been up and down these past couple of years. I think right now, when we're recording this in April 22, they're a bit downward, but don't know where they're going to go. So when it comes to that, as far as planning smart, I mean, of course, I could say, yeah, buy it when it's cheaper. Sure. Stock up. Sure. But something that I've learned when we've done some of these projects, sometimes you may not need a 2x4. Sometimes you might need something that's a little bit less, a 2x2 or something like that. Handy tool to have is a table saw. You can probably get a decent one for maybe around a couple $100. So the advantage is when you go to the hardware store, you're trying to buy lumber. If you notice, you look for the smaller lumber like 1x3s and so on. There's a lot of junk there. They're warped. They're just bowed, and a lot of them are unusable. So you're going to spend a lot of time and effort just to get some decent lumber to bring home. Another thing that, and there actually a reason why a lot of it is bowed and so on, is because the mills, they cut this wood and they don't properly dry it before they ship it out. So it's drying en route. Sometimes in the store it's still wet, and then you get that effect. You get the bowing and all this other stuff. So I've found that if you buy like the 2x4s and so on, you have a decent table saw. Then you have the advantage of being able to say, hey, let me rip it down to what I need. And then you have basically more opportunities, more options with the lumber that you've purchased. So that's something that has been a money saver. Another thing when it comes to lumber is, be creative as far as where you source it from. Crates can be a very valuable thing. So that takes a little bit of ingenuity. You've got to ask different stores, what do you do with them? Do you send them back, or, do you just leave them out there? Can I take a few? Some stores have a policy where they can't do that, but, if you just kind of keep hitting the pavement, you can definitely get some good wood. When it comes to that, I've learned pallets come in all different sizes. So, if you're going to do a project, for animals or for composting or whatnot, where you want to use crates, use it for furniture, or whatever you're going to use it for, see if you can get a number of them that are the same size, because it'll make it easier when you're doing that project and you're not dealing with all these different crazy sizes and you got to do a lot of cutting and things like that. You can also find pallets and lumber, maybe that I've seen this a number of times on Craigslist. You could look on Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes people have bought lumber for projects and then they don't end up using it. So they're selling it at a discount. That might be another way that you can find lumber at least a more reasonable cost, or if not free. So those are some avenues as well. I'm trying to think what else. Another thing too that has been important to the projects that we've been working on is have a good set of power tools, hand tools that you're going to use frequently. So power tools, having extra batteries on hand, batteries that are going to last the job. I've found using some battery operated tools, it's good to have 4 amp hour batteries because they last quite a bit. And then maybe some of the tools you use, like a circular saw, for example. I found that's actually a really good tool to have, a circular saw that's battery operated. You're not dealing with cords and so on. 4 amp hours pretty good because it gives you a lot of long-lasting workability when you're working on projects. When it comes to tools, another resource you could use is look for estate sales. Don't necessarily recommend it for power tools because, you're going to probably find some older tools. Like I've seen a number of table saws, for example. I don't recommend that for power tools, but if you think about hand tools, a lot of times at estate sales, you can find good quality hand tools that were built at a time when they were built better. They were constructed better. They were built with better materials. A lot of the things nowadays, they're using plastic. They're making things thinner, cheap screws and bolts and so on to hold them together. So estate sales can be a real good resource when it comes to hand tools. And, it may involve a little bit of maintenance that you have to do on them, but they're going to probably last a lot longer than some of the newer stuff that you find in the hardware stores. So that's something that you could use as well. I guess maybe one other thing that I can think of when it comes to constructing, especially when you're working with lumber, is you're going to use screws, you're going to use bolts. So if I know for us moving from the city to a rural location, I used to just buy just a little bit at a time just for one specific project, but you're going out there quite often, and with prices going up and so on, there's a lot of advantages of buying things in bulk. So, look at the size of screws that you're going to use, depending on what you're working on. Buy a few big boxes of screws, 3-inch, 2.5, 1.5, and whatnot. You have them on hand. And I found too with constructing things like housing for animals, buy some of the, like the Simpson strong tie, the things you can do to join 2 pieces of wood together. Those things can save you a lot of time and make your structure more durable. So those are some things that I've found that have been helpful as well when we've constructed things on our homestead. So just to kind of wrap up the 3 points that we've talked about today, we've been talking about how to homestead inexpensively. So we talked about stay where you are. There's a lot of advantages of, you're more familiar with where you live and you're accustomed to the expense of living there. So that's an advantage. Start where you are when you think about starting homesteading. And then garden and preserve simply. We talked about planting in ground versus using garden beds, fermenting, dehydrating. Those that can help you to save money as well. And then when it comes to tools, supplies that you're buying for projects, for your garden and so on, plan smart with the tools and supplies that you buy. Make sure they're durable. Look at how they're constructed before you buy them, and then buy in bulk.
Yeah, and especially the buying in bulk, because believe it or not, it does actually save you money in the long run. So those are some of our tips and tricks when it comes to starting to homestead and to homestead inexpensively. It can be done. I know we've done it. We've seen other people do it. It is possible to homestead inexpensively. You don't need all of the fancy gadgets and all of these other things to start your homesteading journey. You can simply do it by changing that mindset of yours, becoming a producer and not a consumer. Well, we hope this podcast finds you and your family well. And until next time,
be safe out there.